before watching the video, take a few seconds to remember, when was the last time you went to the beach? Do you remember how beautiful it was? The sound of the ocean, the gentle breeze, that moment when everything seemed right? Now imagine that this same paradise, the place so many dream of, is also where thousands of people sleep homeless every night. Some have lost their minds. Others wander the streets under the influence of fentanyl and other drugs. That's the image of Florida today, a state full of glitz and luxury, but one that hides the dark side of the United States, a country nearly devoured by the fentanyl crisis. Remember that this video is for educational and awareness-raising purposes. It does not seek to promote or glorify anything negative. And now, let's begin. To understand what's happening in Florida, we must first look at the bigger picture. On a single night in January 2024, more than 771,000 people across the United States were homeless. This is the highest number recorded in the country's recent history, equivalent to 23 homeless people per 10,000 inhabitants.
My name is Michelle. I'm homeless because I got sick with TB. They put me in the hospital for a year. And when I got out the hospital, I ain't been able to get nowhere to stay. It's hard to find somewhere to stay, and they're charging me too much money to get in, and I don't have the money to get in. I'm on a broke income.
The increase compared to 2023 was primarily driven by the growth in the number of people in temporary shelters, which rose by nearly 25%. But there was also a visible increase in families with children, now totaling nearly 150,000 minors living in shelters or on the streets, and in people over 55, who represent a fifth of the total. These figures are not simple statistics. They reflect the rising cost of living. Rent prices have increased by about 18% since 2020, while real wages have barely grown. Added to this is the end of COVID-era support, such as emergency assistance programs and the eviction moratorium, factors that pushed thousands into precarious conditions. In Florida, the picture is no less alarming. During 2024, 35,000 homeless people were counted, 14,000 under some type of temporary shelter, and 16,000 living outdoors. In other words, more than half of the homeless sleep each night in parks, sidewalks, or abandoned cars. The counties with the highest numbers, Miami-Dade, Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Orange, are seeing steady increases. Furthermore, 28% of Florida's homeless population is over 55 years old, reflecting the aging of a phenomenon that previously primarily affected young people. The warm climate, which makes it possible to sleep outdoors almost year-round, also makes the problem invisible. Many believe Florida has less of a crisis because they don't see frozen tents. But the reality is that poverty is hidden beneath the sunlight. How did the so-called Sunshine State get to this situation where luxury and misery share the same streets? The answer is complex. The tourism boom, real estate speculation, low wages, and an overcrowded shelter system have turned the American dream into an uphill battle. And there's something else that can't be ignored: the silent presence of fentanyl, a substance that, despite recent reductions in overdose deaths, continues to mark the lives and deaths of many homeless people. Its shadow will be the guiding thread of the next part. Americans are slowly moving away from the Democratic Party, and there are reasons behind it. To talk about the fentanyl crisis in Florida is to talk about an open wound in the heart of the United States. Over the past 5 years, this synthetic opioid, 50 times more potent than heroin, has become the most lethal face of the modern health crisis. However, reducing the problem to a simple issue of consumption would be unfair and simplistic. Fentanyl is the visible consequence of a deeper chain: hopelessness, lack of comprehensive medical care, and the structural poverty that affects thousands of homeless people in the state. According to data from the Florida Department of Health, more than 6,200 people died from opioid-related overdoses in 2023, and 83% of those cases involve fentanyl or its derivatives. Although the 2024 figure shows a slight decrease, it is still alarming. Palm Beach County reported the highest number of deaths, followed by Broward and Miami-Dade. In some neighborhoods, ambulances respond to 3 or 4 overdose emergencies a day. And behind every statistic is a human story: a worker who lost their job, a mother left homeless, or a veteran who failed to adapt to civilian life. Florida has attempted to respond with mixed measures. On the one hand, it has strengthened the FL Dose program, a system that monitors overdose cases in real time and distributes naloxone, the antidote that reverses the effects of fentanyl, in hospitals, shelters, and police stations. In addition, public naloxone dispensers have been installed in several cities, and hundreds of volunteers walk the streets to teach people how to use them. On the other hand, State Law 893.135 imposes severe penalties for those who traffic opioids, up to life in prison. However, these punitive strategies have not stopped the problem, because the root of it is not just trafficking, but desperation. In the camps of Tampa, Orlando, and Fort Lauderdale, homeless people describe fentanyl as an escape hatch, something that soothes the cold, the fear, and the anxiety of not knowing if they'll have food or a place to sleep tomorrow. Many try it without understanding its potency. Others consume it mixed with other substances without knowing it. Thus, the cycle repeats itself: dependence, loss of health, and finally, homelessness. To what extent can the state punish a tragedy that is actually born of social exclusion? The answer is not simple. The truth is that the war against fentanyl will not be won with prisons, but with education, prevention, and empathy. Every information campaign, every rehabilitation program, and every gesture of community support can make the difference between life and death. In Florida, the battle is not just against a substance, it's against indifference. And as long as the source of this pain, homelessness, loneliness, and precariousness, goes unaddressed, thousands will continue to fall victim. The homeless aren't numbers. They're invisible citizens caught in a storm they didn't make. What would we do if a cheap pill were the only way to forget hunger and fear? That's the uncomfortable question the United States still refuses to answer. In Florida, access to housing has become a privilege that many can no longer afford. The median rent in 2025 will exceed $2,000 per month, and in cities like Miami and Orlando, it has grown more than 30% in the last 4 years. For a working family with stagnant wages and no savings, this increase marks the line between stability and homelessness. In the words of the Miami Herald, the American dream in Florida now costs more than ever, and fewer can afford it. The problem goes beyond money. Florida faces a chronic shortage of affordable housing. For every 100 low-income households, there are only 28 units available at a reasonable price. Furthermore, thousands of apartments have been converted into short-term rentals or tourist investment properties. In this way, the real estate market silently pushes out those who sustain the state's economy: waiters, cleaners, drivers, and laborers. Many of them end up homeless, sleeping in cars or in temporary shelters when there is space. Adding to the lack of housing is the weakness of the social protection system. After the pandemic, rental assistance programs and federal emergency funds were drastically reduced. Without subsidies or support networks, thousands of families were evicted. How is it possible that in a state with some of the most expensive tourist destinations in the world, there are mothers sleeping in parking lots with their children? Furthermore, natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, and extreme heat waves aggravate the situation. Each storm leaves hundreds homeless, and local resources are rarely enough to rebuild. Shelters fill up, volunteers are overwhelmed, and the number of homeless people grows like a shadow along the coast. The emotional toll is also high. Constant instability affects mental health, generating anxiety and hopelessness. Many people lose their jobs simply because they don't have an address where they can receive mail. At this point, poverty ceases to be a temporary circumstance and becomes a permanent state. Florida, with its eternal sunshine and promise of prosperity, today reflects a national dilemma. How can such a wealthy country allow so many to live without a place to sleep? When analyzing the state's response to the crisis, one finds a patchwork of well-intentioned but insufficient efforts. In theory, Florida has attempted to balance the firmness of the law with the urgency of empathy, although in practice, this balance is rarely achieved. On the one hand, the state government has strengthened its legal framework against opioid trafficking. Florida's Act 900,000 imposes extremely harsh penalties for those who distribute fentanyl, even leading to life imprisonment. Authorities maintain that the goal is to address the root of the problem, but this strategy, centered on repression, leaves intact the desperation that fuels demand. Homeless people do not buy fentanyl for pleasure, but because they seek to soothe the physical and emotional pain of living outdoors. What good is punishment if no real alternative is offered? In contrast, social programs have taken a more humane approach. The FL Dose system monitors overdoses in real time and distributes free naloxone in hospitals, police stations, and shelters. Additionally, several community organizations, many with federal funding, offer mental health, occupational therapy, and job reintegration services. But resources are limited and waiting lists are endless. In some counties, the process of obtaining a shelter bed can take up to 6 weeks, an unthinkable luxury for those who have nowhere to sleep tonight. At the federal level, the all-in, the Federal Strategic Plan to Prevent and End Homelessness Plan, launched by the White House, seeks to reduce the homeless population by 25% by 2025. The project promotes the Housing First approach, which prioritizes providing housing before any other services. However, in Florida, its implementation has been uneven. High land prices and a lack of local political will have limited its impact. The reality is that compassion cannot be measured in budgets. The difference between a signed document and a saved life lies on the streets, where every day volunteers, nurses, and ordinary citizens try to do what the system can't. In the words of one Orlando social worker, "You can't cure pain with laws, you cure it with presence." Meanwhile, the homeless continue to be the visible face of a collective failure. And even if the law punishes, compassion, if it exists, remains the only path to hope. Will the United States ever understand that true justice is also built with tenderness? Comparing Florida with New York and San Francisco helps to measure the crisis beyond stereotype. Florida will record around 31,462 cases in 2024, with a population of nearly 22.6 million. That's equivalent to approximately 14 per 10,000 inhabitants. The decisive feature is the high proportion of unsheltered people. More than half sleep on the streets, in cars, or in informal camps. The mild climate favors outdoor survival, but also makes the problem invisible and difficult to count. Furthermore, geographic dispersion, coastal corridors, and counties with heavy tourist pressure complicate a coordinated response. New York City, on the other hand, has the largest shelter network in the country. Around 85,000 people pass through its system each night, a figure subject to weekly fluctuations, driven by a combination of poverty, high rents, and recent migrant arrivals. The state's homelessness rate is around 81 per 10,000 inhabitants on a statewide scale, well above the national average. Its strength is its immediate shelter capacity and the presence of more robust welfare programs. Its Achilles heel is overcrowding, wait times, rising budget costs, and the turnover of users without stable housing. What's the point of having a bed tonight if there's no clear path to permanent housing? San Francisco offers a third model. Its 2024 homelessness count is around 8,300, with a historically high percentage of homeless people still present. Although with signs of a reduction in encampments visible through cleanup interventions, the expansion of temporary beds, and transition programs. With a population of just over 800,000, the per capita rate is high at the municipal level. In its favor, it deploys intensive health services and mobile teams. Against it, the extreme cost of housing and neighborhood opposition to new developments, which hinder the expansion of affordable units. In short, Florida struggles with dispersion and high homelessness. New York with volume and tax pressure. San Francisco with prices that drive out the most vulnerable. In all, affordable housing is the bottleneck, and coordination between health, employment, and justice is the key to ensuring that homeless people stop living in administrative limbo. Can we allow zip codes to determine who deserves a future? Talking about solutions is always more difficult than pointing out mistakes. But if one thing has become clear in recent years, it's that the crisis won't be solved with patches or speeches. Florida, like the rest of the country, needs a comprehensive strategy that understands that behind every tent and every lost glance lies a story, a person, a citizen. The first step is to build affordable housing. There is no policy more effective than guaranteeing a stable roof. The Housing First model, successfully applied in several cities, has shown that offering housing before requiring any other conditions reduces health, security, and emergency costs. In Florida, the challenge is to adapt this model to a market where land is expensive and real estate speculation dominates the political agenda. Secondly, comprehensive health care needs to be strengthened. This is not just about offering medical treatment, but also psychological support, employment, and community networks. Substance dependence, stress, and loneliness must be addressed with empathy, not criminalization. What's the point of imprisoning someone who needs help? Likewise, homeless people must have a voice in decisions. Many programs are designed from distant offices without listening to those living on the streets. Listening to their stories, understanding their fears and hopes is essential to creating real solution. Finally, we citizens also have a responsibility. Donating, supporting, looking without prejudice, demanding humane policies, all of this counts. Every act of compassion, no matter how small, adds up. If every community accepted that dignity is not a privilege, but a right, perhaps one day the words homeless would no longer have to be uttered. Change won't come quickly, but it begins with a simple question. What are we willing to do as a society so that no one else has to sleep under the Florida sky without hope? As night falls on Florida's beaches, the sound of the waves mingles with the silence of those with nowhere else to go. A few meters from the brightly lit hotels and bars, hundreds of homeless people try to rest on the concrete, covering themselves with old blankets while the world goes on. It is in this contrast between luxury and misery, between indifference and compassion, that the true face of the richest country on the planet is revealed. The housing and fentanyl crises are not isolated accidents. They are the reflection of a system that has forgotten its most basic duty, to protect human life. It is not just about building shelters, but about rebuilding empathy. The question then is not how many millions will be invested, but how much heart we are willing to put into it. Homeless in America is not a foreign story. It is a mirror. And as long as we continue to see homeless people as a problem and not as part of us, the American dream will continue to owe a debt that neither money nor laws can pay. Homeless Streets doesn't seek to point fingers, but to raise awareness. Because the first step toward change always begins with fearless looking.